A little bit nervous after watching the Colts against the Jaguars, not able to put up a single point, team that was shut out. And generally, when you have a game like this, there's a lot that is going on your offensive front, in particular your offensive line, that will likely need to be addressed because you're not able to get into the red zone. You're not able to get into the scoring zone. These are situations where there is a distinct disconnect between the game plan and the execution on the field. And with the Colts in Jacksonville, I predicted it last week that the Jaguars aren't going to lose to the Colts in Jacksonville, and it held true. Now, why did it hold true? It held true because of the Jaguars' defensive front, which controlled the line of scrimmage the entire game. From first play to last play, this was a defensive front that got after guys like Quentin Nelson. Quentin Nelson struggled in this game. The interior three of the Colts, which I thought personally was one of the best interior threes in the league, these guys struggled heavily against the Jaguars front. Now, that either means one of two things. Either this Colts front offensive line is not as doesn't have the same prestige that we assigned to it in the past, or maybe this Jacksonville defensive front is ascending and maybe the next unit for you to be looking for on your fantasy squad is a defense to bring out on Sunday, because these guys played fast, they played furious, they caused turnovers. They brought everything you want in a good defense against a very good offensive line, from what we've seen in the past. So we got some film here from this.
Hold on. Hold that film for a sec. Uche. I've been told that maybe we shouldn't have the video anymore just because of like certain issues that might come up of it. Is there a specific play that we can go back and find on our own that we can replay that might show what you're talking about? And then I got something that caught my eye about the Colts too.
I would say if you look in the second quarter, I think this is the third possession for the Colts. Not sure of the down. Let me see what the down and distance is here. Let's see. They don't have any information on the down and distance. Event timeline. Let's see what that says.
Yep. Go ahead and check.
Okay, so
let me tell you what I see with the Colts. They're kind of in the middle in yards per rush so far this year. They're at 4.5. The league average is 4.43. They are top 10 in yards before contact per rush, but that's at 1.49. Wait till you hear another team and where they're at yards before contact per rush. And where they're really doing okay, it's not great, is 3 yards after contact per rush. It's actually below average. League average is, it's almost right there. 3.07 is the league average in that regard. And I'm not suggesting that this is the end of Jonathan Taylor, but this was one of the strengths of Jonathan Taylor, was that he'd be able to step up and have a great offensive line and play. And if they're not looking good against Jacksonville, then either Jacksonville's really, really good or something's wrong with Indianapolis, and that could impact the numbers for Jonathan Taylor. I think that's something that we watch moving forward and not necessarily
Jonathan Taylor. I think it was a matter of volume with him in this game. He had 9 carries, and he averaged 6 yards a carry. Now, 9 carries, 54 yards with a 21-yard long. What do you take from that at the end of the game? You say, well, he wasn't involved in the game. And this is a game that was played in wet weather. This is a game that was played on a wet field. You expect for it to be a slower pace, more running game oriented style of play. But this is something that the Colts decided to kind of go the opposite route with that. In total, only having 13 attempts at rushing in the game. So
it's ridiculous.
It really does. That's more of a game plan thing than an actual Jonathan Taylor thing. He did his part. But again, when you're in a situation where you're down, you haven't scored any points, a defense is able to kind of begin to dictate what the offense does. The coordinators get a little bit more panicky. They start to just call. They start to look for they start to look for explosives instead of building up to an explosive. They're trying to find one right away. And I think that became the problem for the Colts, and that dug them in a deeper hole than maybe they would have been in had they kind of reset themselves and gone back into a more balanced mind state. But as I sit here with the offensive line, I think that Quentin Nelson had a rough day. Quentin Nelson had a rough day against a number of different defenders from the Jaguars. in the pass game, especially. And, maybe that has a little bit to do with the field, but a number of plays where he is being beat on the edge, where he's dipping his head. He's got his eyes looking to the ground, trying to block. That's never a good thing when your head is down while you're trying to pass set. And he was caught in those situations a number of times, and it did affect Matt Ryan in the pocket. Matt Ryan didn't look comfortable. Matt Ryan took shot after shot in the pocket. So it was definitely a factor for all of their offensive linemen, playing against a defense that was playing faster than they were, to be truthful. They were just playing a faster game than the Colts were playing. At the end of the day, that speed kills. And for them, with a quarterback that doesn't have the ability to buy, extra time in the pocket, like a Russell Wilson, Matt Ryan is more like a sitting duck. And that's kind of where he was for the majority of the game. It didn't look like anybody was comfortable against that Jaguar defense, which, to me, that pushes me to believe more that this Jaguars defense may be on the ascension rather than these teams just were having bad days. That's how I saw it.
I was told by an former NFL GM before the season, watch out for that Jaguars defense. And I thought they looked pretty good week 1 against Washington. They seem to have done a great job against Indianapolis. And I wonder if that's a blueprint that other teams can use, including the Chiefs defense against Indianapolis this week. Again, something that might worry you a little bit with Jonathan Taylor, but probably not enough to try and trade him off your squad. Trust me, everybody in your league would be interested. Right. He's going to get more work and the numbers will come. Uche, you said it best. Absolutely. He averaged 6 yards a carry. That's pretty good. All right. DeAndre Swift is one of like 5 running backs that have put up at least 15 PPR points in each of the first 2 games of the season so far. He's on the Lions. I've got some stats on the Lions that just blow me away. And I'm sure that Dan Campbell is loving what his offensive line is doing, but they've had some injuries along the way, including at least 3 starters, I think it was, that didn't play in week 2. Uche, without the video, tell me what you saw for Detroit in their week 2 win over Washington.
Well, I saw balanced play calling, and for the offensive line, there's nothing better than having a balanced play call in your game, or balanced play calls in your game plan when you're missing starters. You want to have guys in situations that they're used to being in. You want to have linemen playing in concepts and football concepts that are normal for the game. You want to start with the run game. You want to be able to set the tempo, run downhill with your offensive line, get them comfortable against a front that isn't as overwhelming as we would have expected them to be with the Commanders. A couple of years ago, we were talking about this Commanders defensive front being one of the best in the NFL, being one of the young, ascending defenses. And it's now 2 years later, and we're not really talking about them anymore because they just haven't been the factor that they had been at one point, with Chase Young and a number of different players. Kerrigan retired.
There's Payne and there's Jonathan Allen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chase Young is kind of disappointed, but that's a subject for another day.
Yeah, the book hasn't been written completely on him yet, but just not the same defensive front 7 that we had expected, or we had seen flashes of over the past couple of years. And this Detroit Lions offense kept a balanced attack against them. You saw play action, you saw counters, you saw traps, and then you saw the meat of what Detroit likes to do on the ground. You saw the vertical running game, you saw dives, you saw inside zones. And that really did keep the Commanders on their back foot. Now, of course, it was a high-scoring game, but in a game like this, especially where you have the Detroit Lions who spent a lot of time in the red zone, that's something that allows you to get a rhythm with your offensive line. And even with a number of starters out, you saw cohesion. You saw a lot of gritty run plays from the Detroit Lions. You see a lot of guards pulling, and just a very consistent and not very complicated, game plan that they ran with, and it worked for them. I saw a lot of good blocks, a lot of stood up defenders. You didn't see the edges compressing on Jeff Goff as you normally sometimes do see in these situations where you got backups in the game, where you got guys who aren't used to being out there for 60 snaps a game. But these guys played well, and they kept a good pocket, a solid pocket for Jeff Goff in the pass game, and they performed well in the run game. So definitely they played it at a level that I had hoped to see them play at before the season started.
And let me just tell you what that level looks like statistically. Through the first 2 weeks of the season, the Lions as a team are averaging 7.15 yards per carry. Now, I know that the offensive line are loving that stat, but I think they might like this stat even more. Uche, you tell me. They are the league leaders in yards before contact per rush with 3.79. The next best team, I don't even know if you can guess the next best team. It's a surprise to me. And because it's
New York Giants.
No, it's Baltimore. And it includes what Lamar does.
Well,
but next best is Baltimore. Baltimore at 2.54. They're getting 1.35 more yards before contact per rush than anybody else in the National Football League.
Yeah.
That is a huge decisive edge.
That's massive.
If I've got DeAndre Swift on my fantasy team, I'm building around him. I got to make sure I get Jamal Williams because I know that Swift will eventually miss some time. I know that Jamal Williams is the next guy up. Heck, even in deep leagues, Craig Reynolds, somebody that I've liked a lot in Detroit, he would be the guy behind Jamal Williams. I think you'd have to be in a seriously deep league to go get him. But you hear those stats, Uche, and I know that would make you pumped as one of the big hog mollies up front blocking for him.
I mean, is it as 3.9 you said?
3.79.
3.7
yards before contact. And they're getting 3.37 yards after contact too. So that's top 12. This is an elite run offense through the first 2 weeks of the season. And I can't believe it with so many starters missing. The scheme is working. This is a really good
scheme. That's a scheme. That's a sign that it's a scheme that has the players in the best position for the best outcome. And 3.7 yards per carry, that means you're already at an efficient run. An efficient run in the NFL is 4 yards per carry. That's considered technically efficient. They're already at that border of that yardage marker before the running back even gets touched. So that is extremely impressive to see an offensive line. That means you're getting great push from your interior three. That means you're moving back their interior, and it's creating that kind of that slight bowl shape that allows for the running back to find a crease because now you've put the defensive ends and the defensive tackles on two different levels. That's going to create a natural crease for a running back to cut back into. That's going to then create a natural wall for an over-scraping linebacker to get stuck behind as the running back cuts back, which at the end of the day will expose larger runs. You'll see explosives that they'll get out of that, which is 20 yards or more in the run game on a certain play. And this is kind of the culture that Dan Campbell talked about that creating when he came to Detroit, a more gritty, grounded culture. And a lot of that begins with the work in the trenches, setting a tempo, setting a mood for the game from the very outset. And a lot of coaches in the NFL who think of things that way, that starts with the offensive line. That starts with the big guys up front, getting down into getting into the game and starting the game with an attitude that will carry forward throughout the quarters. And the rest of the team latches onto that attitude, latches onto that mentality. When you see these guys pushing guys 3-4 yards off the ball before they even get a chance to touch the running back. So definitely something that you would expect the Detroit Lions to build on. And this will be something that'll be a pillar of this offense and this franchise moving forward, I think.
Yeah. Swift, Jamal Williams, if you've got one, get the other on your team. If you drafted Swift so far, great job. Well done. Philadelphia. I broke this stat down specifically just for the Eagles running backs. And maybe that's a little bit unfair, but I think everybody is already locked in on Jalen Hurts as a stud. The questions are more about Miles Sanders and how long can he keep this up for? He's averaging not him. This is the Eagles running backs as a group without Jalen Hurts involved. 5.16 yards per rush. That's just overall. That's sixth best in the NFL through 2 weeks. That's pretty good. 4.07 yards after contact per rush. That's third best. Yards before contact, 1.09. That's below average for the running backs around the league. League average is 1.21. So they're a little below. So is Philadelphia, Uche, are they struggling with their offensive line or are they playing good in your eyes?
I think that the Philly O-line's playing pretty darn well. Now, part of when you look at yards per carry, when you look at yards before contact, there can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. It can be a little bit of a double-edged sword because on one end, yes, you do want to see 2-3 yards before contact, but also, and it all again comes down to game planning. There can be a little bit of you can be misled a little bit because sometimes that number gets knocked down from one or two read option plays where you have a read RPO and it gets stuffed at the line. Well, an RPO is not a traditional run play in a lot of offensive linemen's opinion because that could be a pass play, that could be a run play based on the coverage that the quarterback looks at, based on what the checks are decided upon by the coaches. So you can be in a situation where you've blown a defensive line off the ball, like you've blown them off the ball, and you're feeling, oh, this should be a huge run, but it was a pass.
Throw, right?
And then you have a situation where it looks like they're preparing for a run or they're running a run blitz. So you're thinking, okay, this has to be a pass on the RPO, but it's a run. And sometimes things get called and they're a little wacky like that, where now you get a 2-yard loss or a 1-yard gain. So that may nullify 2 or 3 other run plays where you had more in terms of yards per carry, yards before contact. Now, just looking at the film from the Philadelphia Eagles and what they've been doing, this looks like a well-seasoned group, in my opinion. They look more polished than any other offensive line outside of, I would say, the Chiefs. I would say they're about on the same level of polish, just from an optics standpoint. Watching how the pocket forms, watching how they surge off the ball in the run game, they look pretty good. They didn't have a problem with this Vikings defensive front on Monday night. There was no problem there at all. These guys played a strong game. Now you have a dynamic quarterback like Jalen Hurts who can get out of the pocket, buy extra time, and sometimes they take advantage of that. And so it might appear as though he was getting more pressure than maybe he was because he decided to bounce to the outside to let one of his receivers run their scramble tree and hit him on a comeback route or something like that. But overall, this was an offensive line that looked very sound. They didn't look like they were breaking a sweat out there against Minnesota, in my opinion.
So I would expect that to continue. And I think that that's obviously a great thing for Miles Sanders. The one thing that I worry about with Sanders is that if he does miss some time, who's the next guy up? Is it going to be Kenny Gainwell? Is it going to be Boston Scott? It's probably going to be both of them, and it's probably going to be even more Jalen Hurts. So I would take this as a really good sign for Jalen Hurts to be that dude that helps you take down fantasy leagues. I remember, Uche, it took me so long to come around on Jalen Hurts. 7 months ago, I didn't want anything to do with
all of us. I didn't want nothing to do with them either. I didn't buy in. I didn't buy it. I just didn't buy it.
It took me seeing it in person in practice, and he played really well. Top 5 offensive lines. It sounded like Kansas City was first for you. Philly was second. Just the names of the teams, Uche, and then I got to hit you up on one more offensive line. Who's 3? Who's 4?
Right now, I got Kansas City at 1. I got Philly at 2, Detroit at 3. And I got the Colts at 4, Cleveland at 5.
Okay. Well, Nick Chubb definitely approves of that top 5. We'll see about that Colts offensive line bouncing back. But everybody thought that the Cincinnati Bengals would have a top 5 offensive line. Uche, through the first 2 weeks of the season, they are dead last in yards after contact per rush. They're kind of close to league average in yards before contact per rush. They are getting,
which is not good for them.
Their first down per rush percentage is 8.3%. That's dead last in the league. And the simple stat, yards before rush, 3.02. That's not the worst. It's not even the second worst, but it is the 4th worst. People are freaking out about Joe Mixon out there. What do you see from the Cincy offensive line? Is there a weak spot, or is it just going to take time for them to gel?
Okay, so I want to be fair in how I approach this and how I lay this out for the audience. This was an offensive line that was retooled almost completely in free agency. So you're looking at a team that has 3 new starters: center, right guard, right tackle. These are veteran offensive linemen. These aren't young guys. These aren't guys who don't have a number of starts under their belt. These are guys who are considered well vetted in regards to the amount of snaps they have individually on the field. In watching their film, this is the most disappointing offensive line that I've seen this year by far. Now, why is that?
Okay.
I think that there is a little bit of chemistry that has to be built still, which is a hard thing to build to a point where you're synchronized completely. But I expected them to be further along than this. But I think at the end of the day, the biggest problem on their offensive line at the moment, in my opinion, is La'el Collins. And that's the guy that you're supposed to worry the least about in the people that they've added in free agency and what they've built on from the line they had last year. Right now, the line they had last year looks miles better than the line that they have right now. And if you watch that Bengals Cowboys game, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. La'el Collins, to be fair to the Bengals, La'el Collins right now is the problem on their offensive line. The rest of the offensive line actually did not play bad. They actually played fairly well against the rest of the Dallas Cowboys defense. The biggest issue was that La'el Collins was being utterly dominated by Micah Parsons. And when I say dominated, I say that with an emphasis on the D. Dominated.
Okay.
This did not look like a professional, $50 million plus offensive tackle playing against, the premier, outside rusher, defensive end of the Cowboys, which, I guess historically you look and you say, hey, it's the left tackle, right? That's the guy. That's the more superior athlete for the offensive line. That's the guy who goes up against the best athlete on the defense. Well, in this matchup, you have who is supposed to be a pretty good athlete himself at right tackle, but also a former teammate to the guy that he's playing against. There's supposed to be some familiarity there. There's supposed to be some understanding of what you need to do to take away their best options. This is a guy who had thousands of reps against Micah Parsons as a Dallas Cowboy, from training camp, from OTAs to training camp to seasonal practices. He knows what this guy is about. So how do you come into this game and put up such a whimper of a performance? I mean, it almost seemed as if he was, dare I say, and I never like to say this for an offensive lineman, it looked as if La'el Collins was scared to play against this guy.
Ooh.
His technique was horrid.
Ooh. Okay.
His awareness and his spacing and where he needed to be as a player was not there. He was in the wrong places to try and block this guy. And there were a couple of plays where he ignored blocking him altogether. And it was his guy. And it really hurt Joe Burrow. It took away Joe Burrow's trust in anything in his offensive line throughout the course of that game. He didn't trust the good pockets that he had. He didn't trust them. He would run prematurely because he wasn't trusting it anymore.
We saw that.
And that is, and that's a direct result of what La'el Collins did in his performance. Were they perfect across the board? No, but they were actually pretty solid across the board. I was freeze framing these looks on film. They were solid. They were solid.
Okay.
And he took away from that. So I think that hurt them, and that will hurt them until he will continue to struggle until they find a way to get his technique tightened back up. Maybe, get the nerves. Maybe he had some nerves that were had him a little rattled early in the game that kind of pushed his game off. I'm not sure, but it didn't look good. As an offensive lineman, when you see those kinds of things, it's deeper than just him being beat in that moment. Preparation has to be changed. Preparation has to be adjusted to get him ready for the next game.
And I know you went deep on that, and you have film to back it up. What's going on with La'el Collins and what's going on with the Bengals. Really quickly, is there a week that you have in mind where if Collins and maybe the rest of that offensive line, if they can't go from solid/bad to good/solid, that you'd panic and say, this is a problem that's going to last all season long?
You'll know by week 5.
Okay.
The first quarter of the season is generally the grace period with coaches in terms of, trying to coach up and tighten up issues that have sprung up early in the season. And by the fifth game, you want those issues to be handled, and you want those issues to be a thing of the past. And that's usually where you see offenses or you see teams themselves begin to take on the identity of what they are. They're now solidified, and this is how it's going to be for the rest of the season. Now, does it mean that they can go up or down a little bit here from that point to the end of the season? Sure. But I think if you get to week 5 and you're not confident in your offensive line, it's going to be hard to find confidence moving through the rest of the season.
So there you have it. By week 5, we should have a better idea of where the Bengals stand. We'll see if the Colts can improve by then, but we already know to expect good things from the Eagles, the Lions, the Chiefs. Uche Nwaneri, host of Lyman Life Live with Justin Blaylock right here on YouTube. Can't wait to check in with you again in a couple of weeks and see how some other offensive lines are doing. But in between now and then, we'll be checking you out. Lyman Life Live here on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everybody else for watching. You're very welcome. For Uche, I'm Dave. Thanks for coming out.